Today on ADG Pro, we're taking a look back at Donald Duck's Playground to try and figure out some speedrun strats in order to beat the game as fast as possible. Now, this is actually a video I attempted to make a while back, but it turns out that trying to go fast in this game is extraordinarily nuanced. I mean, you might think it would be as simple as just making enough money to buy all the playground equipment and then doing so, but nope, there's a lot more to it. So much so that after getting most of the first attempt at a video done, I discovered a massive discrepancy which derailed the entire thing, as I didn't have enough time left to do everything over again. However, before we get into the details of how to play this game as fast as possible, I may want to give a brief overview of what a speedrun actually is, since I've never actually brought this up in an ADG video before. In essence, a speedrun is an attempt to beat a game as fast as possible by whatever means necessary, which does not involve cheat codes or external tools, as there's generally separate categories for speedruns achieved in those manners. The speedruns are also generally separated into different categories, depending on the game and any particular conditions the player is supposed to follow. The term any percent generally means anything goes, 100% generally means acquiring all unique items, glitchless bans the use of major glitches, though will sometimes allow minor ones provided they're easy to perform, and then many games will have special game-specific categories or other less common ones, such as warpless, meaning you can still use glitches and such, but you cannot use any warps, glitched or otherwise, to skip entire levels or segments of a game. As of I'm making this video, Donald Duck's Playground presently only has one category on the Speedrun.com leaderboard specifically for the C64 version, presently with 3 ranked submissions. But as you might imagine, given the open-ended nature of how this game ends, categories like any percent and 100% don't make a whole lot of sense. So the category that was invented is called Play on All Equipment, which simply means to buy all pieces of playground equipment in the game and to play on each of them at least once. Now, the C64 version differs from the PC booter version in that the playground is a 5x3 grid of squares that you can customize however you want, whereas here in the PC version, most playground equipment has fixed locations across 4 different screens, and any of the ones you can move around also have set locations that they initially spawn in. Still, I feel this is an adequate category, so I'll be going by that same logic and trying to figure out how to do an optimal run here. However, there's a massive difference in how the game plays in the PC version between its difficulty levels. The 3 difficulty levels here are beginner, intermediate, and advanced, and it's not immediately clear-cut which is going to result in the fastest possible run. Now technically, the speedrun categories could be separated by difficulty, and as such, I'm going to make sure I go over the details of all 3 difficulty settings and put together my own speedruns for all 3, but there are a number of differences right off the bat which are extremely pertinent. Firstly, walking speed. Donald Duck has different speeds he'll move at based on the difficulty selection, going faster the higher the difficulty is set, and this is a significant difference in speed. The different minigames each have their own different speeds, which is not important since we'll be measuring those by money earned in a few moments, but the speed while walking around town and in the stores is a big deal because you have to do a lot of walking. I did some measurements and found that for walking around town and in the stores, Donald walks about twice as fast in intermediate compared to beginner, and about twice as fast in advanced compared to intermediate, thus about 4 times faster in advanced compared to beginner. Secondly, when you go to the stores in the beginner or intermediate skill settings, you have to buy items one at a time, but on advanced, you're allowed to bring up to 3 different toys up to the counter and pay for them all at once, which adds a substantial layer of optimization to consider for the advanced setting. Also, in beginner, all items have values equal to a single unit of currency. In intermediate, all items have values equal to 2 units of currency, which may or may not be the same unit. And in advanced, anything goes. Now, since exchanging units of currency is very slow, we're going to want to minimize the total amount of currency exchanges we need every step of the way, not just from completing jobs, but when paying for items and making change. And thirdly, none of this matters in terms of playing on the playground. Once you're on the playground and playing as one of Donald's nephews, Dewey specifically if we're going by the colors, the speed of the gameplay is the same between all 3 difficulty selections. Thus going through this last part of the game to play on all of the playground equipment is entirely down to optimized movement. Now, there is technically one exception, as the topmost screen goes faster for some reason the more toys you have on it, and I'm not entirely certain why, but this change in speed is constant, and since you're not going to be going here until you have all the toys anyways, it's kind of a moot point. And no, you can't bring the toys here down onto the other screens. Also, I should point out, whenever you make an attempt to go to the playground, there's a small chance that you'll get stopped by Donald's nephews riding down the train tracks, and unfortunately, this is entirely random. I've timed it out, and if this happens, you lose exactly 15.5 seconds every time. So I think rather than completely invalidate a run thanks to this one event, if this happens, the run should simply have 15.5 seconds reduced from its overall time. I know that's not generally how speedruns are supposed to work, but since this happens super late in every run, it'd be annoying having a good run die entirely because of this random event, which always takes the exact amount of time to play out. The last thing to point out is that, unlike the C64 version among others, you select your difficulty by walking under one of 3 archways before you enter Duckburg proper, whereas in the C64 game, you simply choose your difficulty from a menu. For this reason, and given the fixed nature of the playground, I would propose that timing for a speedrun of this PC version should start the moment the proper gameplay begins upon changing screens from the difficulty select screen to Duckburg, and timing should end when you get to the bottom of the rocket ship slide in the park, since there's a very distinct way that slide ends, which can easily be timed to the frame. Now, even though the meat of the game is playing the 4 different mini-games, I actually want to go over the toys you can purchase first, since it's important we know the money-making targets that we're aiming for. There's 3 different shops: Goofy's Junk Shop, Mickey's Hardware Store, and Minnie's 5 and 10. Now, each store has 6 toys to buy in total, and the total amount you'll need to spend across all 3 stores is $1.72 on beginner, $9.37 on intermediate, and exactly $28 on advanced. But because you can only buy 1 item at a time on beginner and intermediate, and up to 3 at a time on advanced, we need to pay attention to how many units of currency we need. For starters, to pay for everything with exact change on beginner, we would need 2 pennies, 7 nickels, 6 dimes, and 3 quarters. Doesn't sound so bad, except when we earn money from a mini-game, the amount of change we get follows an interesting pattern. Since the game's trying to give the player more nickels and dimes that would normally be necessary to receive, I had to first determine exactly how this was working. Now, in terms of dollars, you'll always get the most optimal amount. So as soon as you hit $5, you get a $5 bill. As soon as you hit $10, you get a $10 bill. And I'm not entirely certain if $20 bills are even a thing in this game, as there doesn't look like there's space for them. Plus, to actually earn one from a minigame would be impressive to say the least. For the cents, though, you always get the appropriate amount of pennies, but for nickels, dimes, and quarters, you get the following amounts for each multiple of 5 cents. And do you see the pattern here? It's actually a pretty clever pattern. You get 1 quarter and 1 nickel for every 30 cents. Dimes follow a pattern of none 1 2 none 1 2 for every multiple of 10 in sequence. And you also get an additional nickel every time the last digit in the cents is between 5 and 9. Because of this pattern, though, the most dimes we can ever earn from any job in one shift is 2, the most quarters is 3, and the most nickels is 4. This means to get the appropriate units of currency we need, we either need to take multiple shifts or optimize making change. The timing varies a bunch depending on where the cursors move to, but I've generally found that each unit of currency earned from a job takes roughly 4.5 seconds to count up on average. Each unit of currency used to pay for an item in the store takes roughly 8 seconds to do on average, and every unit of currency you get as change takes roughly 11 seconds to not only grab from the register, but to also count up and then enter your wallet at the end. Generally speaking, we want to avoid making change unless the amount of units of currency we would need to earn is excessive in some way. Or we hit the unit limits. Yeah, moving on to intermediate, to pay for everything with exact change there, we would need 2 pennies, 7 nickels, 10 dimes, 12 quarters, and 5 $1 bills. Not only would that be a bit of a mess to go for, but there's a cap of 9 currency units on each pile. When a 10th currency unit enters a pile, it'll automatically and very slowly convert several of those units into a larger denomination. So we absolutely need to avoid that under all circumstances. And then with advanced, things get a lot more interesting, since for every shop there are 10 possible combinations of 3+3 toys bought simultaneously. This leads to so many possibilities, especially when we have to account for paying with things with either exact change or with larger denominations, that I actually wrote a QBasic program to help figure this out. This program essentially has all of the store data in it, which I need to choose between in code before starting, so it must be run from inside the QBasic environment. And then once running, I can cycle through all 10 possible combinations of purchases, see what denominations they require, see what denominations I get back if I make change, and then see a rough estimate of the time required to do it all. I had to do similar optimizations as well for the beginner and intermediate skill levels, but for those, since you can only buy one item at a time, it was more important to me to find a way to not exceed the 9-unit limit for each denomination. We'll look at what I came up with in a bit, but now that we know what we're ultimately trying to optimize for, it's time to make some cash. Now there's 4 jobs Donald can take in the city: routing trains at the train depot, sorting fresh food at the produce farm, stocking shelves at the toy shop, or loading cargo carriers at the airport. Now, these games are all fairly easy to optimize and get really good at as an adult player, so all I did was play a 9-minute shift on each, which is the largest shift time you can take, do this on all 3 skill levels, and figure out roughly how much money could be made per minute. Now, there's a few things to note about this. The first is that it actually takes time to advance the shift timer to take those longer shifts. The default shift length is 2 minutes. Pressing up or down once will start advancing the timer up or down, but it will only tick by 1 minute up or down every 1 1/3 seconds, or 80 frames since the game runs at 60 frames per second. Now let's go over the specifics and optimizations for each job in sequence. The train depot is up first, and this one's probably the most interesting minigame, although, as we're going to see shortly, the worst for making cash. Unless you're playing on advanced. On the beginner and intermediate settings, the train actually takes a moment to start moving, which is time being wasted, and the train itself doesn't move all that fast, in order to give you time to reach the levers you need to reach to divert the train. One optimization I would suggest is to leave the first switch enabled by default and the second switch disabled by default. This effectively creates the shortest loop possible for the train to run, so that if you make a mistake or don't have time to do something, there isn't as long of a wait for the train to make it back around to the start of the sequence again. I only get money in this minigame when the train completes a pickup and subsequent delivery, earning 10 cents per delivery on beginner, 20 cents per on intermediate, and 30 cents per on advanced, which is actually the highest per operation cash flow of all of the minigames, but as you're going to see soon, because of how long it takes the train to get around, that amount really should have been higher. Next up is the produce farm. This one's really simple, as all you do is position Donald Duck to catch either lemons, pumpkins, or watermelons being tossed out, and then drop them into their appropriate bins. The higher the difficulty level is, simply makes things go faster, with an earning rate of a single penny per piece of produce sorted on beginner, 2 pennies on intermediate, and 3 on advanced. Next we have the toy shop. This one's got a massive number of quirks to it, so let's get the basics out of the way first. All you have to do is sort various toys onto shelves with a matching toy. When you're not carrying a toy, you can instead pick up the ladder and move it around. If you drop a toy or put one in the wrong spot, it breaks and you have to grab another. Also, after a certain period of time, a train runs by which shakes items loose and causes you to lose earned money unless you use the lever at the far right of the screen to lock all the toys in place. This train runs at intervals of 80, 65, and 50 seconds on the beginner, intermediate, and advanced skill settings respectively, and it takes 6 seconds for the train to pass on all 3 difficulty levels. So yeah, that's one thing that's quirky right away, is that you're only penalized for toys broken from the train passing. If you intentionally drop a toy you don't feel like sorting, it does not count against you. I don't actually know if it's like this or not on the other ports of the game, but since this is the normal behavior here, we can take advantage of this and intentionally drop away any toy we're given to sort, which would take a while to put into an appropriate spot. Generally speaking, I consider these areas I've highlighted to be worth the effort to sort into, with the bottom left corner obviously being the fastest of them all. But if you sat there only waiting for items which were valid for that corner, you'd be earning less than if you actually moved around a little. Though I was a bit curious about how the randomization was playing out here, since this minigame is affected by the RNG more than any of the others. Now, after doing some testing and analyzing how things are being randomized, I can safely say that the only factor which affects what kind of toy will be given to sort is if there's one anywhere in the shelves at all. For instance, if there's only one red teddy bear and 4 blue teddy bears, your odds of rolling a red teddy bear versus a blue teddy bear are identical. Basically, you have equal odds for every different kind of toy to appear, and the amount of shelves already stocked with each kind of toy plays no role in this process whatsoever. Because of this, the most optimal layout of toys would be to have as many different kinds of toys in the bottom left section as possible. If you enter the toy shop and there's a bunch of empty slots in the bottom left, or many of those slots have the exact same toys, then that's not going to be an optimal arrangement to work with. In this event, pressing the F5 key immediately puts you back outside, but unfortunately not right next to the entrance to the toy shop, so you have to end up spending time walking back inside if you do this. Still, despite all of these factors, the toy shop can earn you a considerable amount of cash. 5 cents per toy on beginner, 10 per toy on intermediate, and 15 per toy on advanced. And if you have an optimal layout of toys on the shelves, this can add up very fast. But lastly, we have the airport. Now, something I need to point out right away is that the other 3 jobs start the moment you confirm your shift length, and their timers count down the entire time until the shift is over. The airport, however, is an exception. Every shift you start here burns 13 seconds when the plane initially flies in and the cargo carriers come out, during which the timer is not counting down. Furthermore, every 2 minutes and 35 seconds, the cargo carriers are taken away, loaded onto the plane, and new cargo carriers come out. This process also pauses the timer and takes 18 seconds to complete. Thus, for each length of shift, you will lose the indicated amount of time to unskippable sequences. But when your shift is over, even though one more sequence plays out with the plane taking off, this sequence is skippable, so does not factor into how much extra time is being wasted. Now, sorting the cargo into the carriers can be a bit tricky, but I find pronouncing the 3-letter codes like they're actual words helps me out considerably. For instance, at the start of this shift here on beginner skill, I read these names to myself as Jifhao Litbim, always in that order since that's the order they're on the screen right now. And doing that really helps me visualize them as they're going down the conveyor. Or here's another batch in intermediate, which I would identify as Ace How Phil Movie. In any case, you get 3, 6, and 9 cents per piece of cargo sorted here for beginner, intermediate, and advanced skills respectively, which may not sound like a lot, but I've also found each operation here is way faster than any of the other minigames, even the toy shop, and the final numbers absolutely reflect this. First, if we take a look at my averages for beginner skill, we see that the train depot is an absolute joke, averaging only about 8 cents a minute. The produce farm isn't much better at about 13 cents a minute. The toy shop is much better, averaging about 54 cents a minute. And then the airport is the absolute best way to earn cash at about 95 cents per minute. Now, since we only need to earn $1.72 in total, taking a 2-minute shift at the airport only incurs a very tiny time penalty compared to virtually everything else we could try here. The only trick is that if we do that, we're going to need to make change for $1 at some point. But this is still the most optimal thing we could be doing by far. For intermediate skill, we have pretty similar results in terms of the relative rate of cash for each job, averaging about 27 cents a minute at the train depot, 40 cents a minute at the produce farm, 88 cents a minute at the toy shop, and $1.59 per minute at the airport. So again, the airport handily beats out the other locations for earning the $9.37 that we're going to need. And since we have to make change at some point in some manner to buy everything on intermediate, we might as well just do it all in a single 6-minute airport shift. Advanced skill, however, had some very interesting results. The worst job on offer here is actually the produce farm, earning roughly 67 cents a minute, and this is because the speed difference from intermediate to advanced is very subtle for this job. The train depot, on the other hand, goes way faster, thus why its average cash per minute shot up to $1.03. The toy shop went up to about $1.68 a minute, and while the airport technically went up to $2.10 a minute, do keep in mind that that's per minute of shift time, meaning if we decide to go for a 9-minute shift, we actually lose an extra 67 seconds to unskippable cutscenes, which wasn't a big deal before, but now that the toy shop and airport are closer in terms of average per minute, taking this into account actually makes the airport more like $1.87 per minute, which is much closer to the toy shop rate. In fact, it's close enough that it almost becomes a point of preference which job to take. Almost. And again, the toy shop also has the greatest amount of RNG, and if you get a bad layout, you would either need to restart your run or take a 4.5 second time loss going back out to the street and re-entering the shop for another chance. And that's also keeping in mind you absolutely would need to take 2 shifts at the very least to get enough cash to buy everything here, regardless of anything. So, now that we have all of the data we need to figure things out, I'm now going to reveal the routing I ultimately came up with. Now, I did a lot of fiddling around in terms of units of currency and such, and found fairly optimal ways to buy everything in all 3 difficulty modes, so let's start with the easiest one first. Beginner difficulty ultimately only needs a very small amount of cash, but it would take a minimum of 3 shifts to get all of the dimes we would need straight up. So it's simpler that we just do a single 2-minute shift at the airport and aim to make exactly $1.74. This in turn gets us 4 pennies, 2 nickels, a dime, 2 quarters, and a $1 bill. 2 cents more than we technically need. Next, because of how insufferably slow we walk on beginner, we really want to visit the stores from the bottom up, since the path to the park is off at the top left. Thus, we want to go into Minis 5 and 10, and specifically buy the ladder, and pay for that ladder with the dollar bill we got. When we make change, we now have the opportunity to get all the missing change we need to pay for everything exactly. Thus, we take 5 nickels and 5 dimes as our change, then we simply need to buy everything that's left using exact change for each, then head to the playground to play on everything. In the end, my beginner run was the fastest of them all despite the really slow walking speed, simply because you basically spend only about 1/9 of it at the airport and the rest buying stuff and playing in the playground. It clocked in at 18 minutes and 19.932 seconds, though did get interrupted by the nephews on the train tracks on the way to the playground. So if we exclude that interruption, that becomes 18 minutes and 4.432 seconds. Intermediate proved to actually be the most annoying to route out, believe it or not. Not the hardest by any stretch, but annoying since you not only need significantly more cash, but you technically also need 10 dimes and 12 quarters, which is more than the limit of 9 for each denomination. Plus, given the walking speed is still somewhat slow, I really wanted to try and get this to work going to Minis 5 and 10 first. Well, it turns out there was indeed a way to pull this off. First, you head to the airport and take a 6-minute shift and aim to earn exactly $9.42, which is 5 cents more than we technically need. Next, head to Minis 5 and 10 and buy the rocking horse first and pay for it with exact change. This uses up both the dime and the nickel that we earned, which frees up enough space in our dimes pile to get the rest of the dimes that we're going to need with change. Thus, the next item we want to buy is the ladder, but despite how much it costs, pay for it with the $5 bill. This allows us to make almost all of the change that we're going to need while knocking one of those 12 quarters we need off the list, bringing that down to 11. The exact change we want to make from this purchase is 7 nickels, 9 dimes, 6 quarters, and a single $1 bill. Next, we want to buy the parallel bars, but once again, we're going to make change, this time from a $1 bill, taking 2 quarters as change. Not only does this bring our quarters stack up to 9, but it also reduces the number of quarters that we're going to need overall from 11 down to 9. Thus, we now have all of the precise denominations we need to pay for everything remaining with exact change. Thus, we do all of that, go to the playground, play with all the toys, and my attempt in particular ended in 25 minutes and 17.182 seconds. Though it too got interrupted by the nephews on the train tracks, which as far as I can tell is roughly a 1 in 4 chance, so I just got really unlucky both times. But if we allow excluding that event from the overall time, it becomes 25 minutes and 1.682 seconds. However, one thing I did notice is that it's actually very possible to get the necessary cash in just a 5-minute shift at the airport instead of a 6-minute shift, which not only saves a minute of shift time, but an additional 18 seconds from not having to go through one of the unskippable cutscenes. And the only trouble is that the RNG and my own skill basically made it a 50-50 shot whether I could pull off getting the right amount of cash in just a 5-minute shift instead of 6. Essentially, 6-minute shifts are the safe strat, but 5-minute shifts are the record attempt strat. Lastly, advanced difficulty. So, one thing I knew right away would be that getting enough exact change in this mode was going to be a nightmare to try and figure out. So instead, I went through the data with my special program I wrote to try and figure out the fastest ways to utilize $10 bills. Since if I could find fast ways to make useful change from a couple $10 bills, then that would make figuring out airport shifts much easier. Plus, since the walking speed is so much faster, it now makes sense to go to the stores in whichever order works out the best, instead of always starting from minis 5 and 10. The crazy thing is, the route I came up with is almost poetic in how it plays out, because to make it work, you just need 3 $1 bills, a $5 bill, and 2 $10 bills. Seriously, you do not need to get extra change at all to make this work. There's just one catch. Shifts at the airport will always get you an income which is a multiple of 9 cents. So we're ultimately going to end up with some change anyways, since $28 is not a multiple of 9 cents. Essentially, you need to take 2 airport shifts. Your first shift should be a full 9 minutes, and you're aiming to make exactly $18, which will get you the $3 bills, the $5 bill, and one of the 10s that we need. The second shift should be 5 minutes long, and you're aiming for $10.35 exactly, as this will net you the remaining $10 note and 3 extra coins. Now technically, any amount from $10 up without exceeding $10.35 is fine, but $10.08, $10.17, and $10.26 all net you 4 extra coins instead of just 3. Next, we're going to go shopping at Mickey's hardware store first. The 3 items we want to buy before anything else are the somersault bar, catwalk, and ship's wheel. And we're going to pay for them with one of our $10 bills, taking 1 penny, 1 nickel, 1 quarter, and a $5 bill as change. Then we buy the rest of the items in the store with exact change, which happens to be just the $5 bill and a nickel. We then move on to Goofy's junk store and buy the slide, ladder, and box, again paying for these with a $10 bill, which gets us a nickel, dime, quarter, and a $1 bill and $5 bill as change. And then we're all set for exact change for all remaining purchases. When we go to buy what's left in the junk store, we pay for it using a penny, nickel, 2 quarters, and the $5 bill. Then we go down to minis 5 and 10, buy the tetherball pole, rings, and ladder together using a dime, $1 bill, and $5 bill, and buy the remaining 3 items for exactly 3 $1 bills. So yeah, I don't think this advanced route is going to get any more optimized than this, and when I made the attempt, I ended with a total time of 25 minutes and 25.34 seconds. Though this one did not get interrupted at the train tracks, so that time doesn't need to get adjusted. That said, I did notice I had a full minute to spare on both of my airport shifts due to some decent luck. So a 9-minute and 5-minute shift together is the safe strat, while for record-making attempts, you would want to take an 8-minute shift and a 4-minute shift. Now technically, you would save 18 seconds of unskippable cutscenes by going with a 7-minute shift and 5-minute shift together instead, but you'd have to adjust your target values to $16.02 for the 7-minute shift and $12.06 for the 5-minute shift, and both of those are going to be extremely difficult to hit. Anywho, I'm glad to finally be able to put this game to rest once and for all. The thing is, I am very much not a speedrunner. I do not enjoy the precision necessary to play games at that level, but that doesn't mean I can't appreciate the effort which goes into playing games lightning fast. So I'm hoping my insights here inspire some people to try running this game and even further optimizing the process of making money from the jobs and spending it on the toys for the playground. If you look in the video description, you'll see that I've linked an unlisted video which contains all 3 of my full runs in it, for those of you who are curious, and while I have no desire to submit these to any leaderboards, I know from how I was playing that these times could very much be improved upon. So if you want to try to beat those times, go right ahead, because I know it's possible and I have no desire to do it myself. So that'll be all for today's ADG Pro video. Next up, 2 weeks from now on Saturday, August 13th, will be a standard review, episode 302, where we're going to be taking a look at one of the last racing games ever made for DOS with an overhead perspective. Yeah, once 3D became a thing, overhead perspectives for driving games rapidly fell out of favor, but that didn't stop some devs from giving it a go, so be sure to stay tuned to see how this one turned out. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to all the people seen here supporting me on Patreon. If you'd like to join in with them and support the show directly, head on over to patreon.com/KASICK.